Well, this is it. Took me a little while, but I finally got my own place. Man, I can't wait for all the reviews I can make. Just walk over here. Ouch!
What happened? Who am I? What am I?
Huh.
5 minutes later.
Welp, I'm back. Okay, I know it's been a while since I've made a video on here, but that's probably because I was in a coma or something. To be honest, I don't really know, but... Well, I'm back, and I decided to do something kind of big since I'm back. A game that's not only influenced many games to this day, but it's also been cited as one of the greatest video games of all time. I'm of course talking about Echo the Dolphin. Jeez, you people are fucking rude. I want to do something cool, something big, something that would bring back this channel, but like, what do you guys want me to do? Review Zelda or something? An NES controller. Wait, I didn't mean this.
The Legend of Zelda, a series that's not only stood the test of time with each new entry over its 30 years of history, but many of its games are regarded as not just the best games of their time, but of all time. Almost the entirety of the adventure gaming genre owes it to this beloved series. But of course, if we're going to be talking about the series, we should be looking at the game that started it all, The Legend of Zelda for the NES.
Now, aside from me blurting out that I should review this game earlier, a good friend of mine told me while I was in my coma that I should review this game, and that I would wake up. And if I didn't do it, then I would have to be put back to sleep. Anyways though, let's get started.
Shigeru Miyamoto and Takeshi Tezuka, two developers over at Nintendo working on what's soon to be a launch title to a system add-on for the Famicom Disk System. They both had experience in developing games before Zelda, but this was to be something a little bit different from the norm of console gaming at the time. Miyamoto, coming off the success that was Super Mario Bros., wanted to make a game that was a little less linear. In doing that, it made the game from going from left to right in one level to creating an open world where you can go wherever the game can let you. They wanted to make a game in which the player had to go out of their way to think about their surroundings, and use the past experience of the game to progress. Now, how effectively The Legend of Zelda has used this is up to debate, but this was still pretty groundbreaking from 1986. Now, as for the Famicom Disk System, it was a thing that was connected to the bottom of the Famicom, the Japanese NES, and it let you use discs that looked like floppy disks. Now, the reason why this was needed for a game like The Legend of Zelda was, well, it saved the game, I'm assuming. Just like the Japanese version of Metroid let you save, in comparison to the American version where it just had a huge-ass password. The game became a launch title for the Disk System, but since the Famicom Disk System never came out in America, what did they do to get around for saving? Well, The Legend of Zelda was one of the first games to have a battery backup, where the game would save if the battery still worked. And if it didn't, well, then you would have to replace the battery. Which, depending on what it isn't a huge deal, most of the time.
I would show you how this works, but considering I don't actually own a copy, I actually played this game using an NES Classic. Now this right here is a great emulating device, and I'm not really too keen about using emulators to begin with, but considering that this system plays the games almost absolutely perfectly in HD, there really was no contest here, but anyways.
Let's talk about the story of the game. With the opening screen call, we get some text that says, "Many years ago, the Prince of Darkness, Ganon," you mean Ganon, "stole the one of the Triforces with power. Princess Zelda had the one of Triforce with wisdom. She divided them into 8 units to hide them, and..."
It is written, only Link can defeat Ganon. Great! I'll grab my stuff! There is no time. Your sword is enough. Squadala! We are off!
Yeah, that's pretty much it. You go throughout Hyrule, going into each dungeon, getting each piece so Ganon doesn't get it. There's 3 pieces of the Triforce: Power, which Ganon has, Wisdom, which Zelda has, and Courage, which, well, in this game's case it doesn't exist, so let's not think about that. You, as the hero, need to get all the pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom and save the princess. You can name the character whatever you want, but this little guy with a green tunic is named Link, because he's a link between the player and the game, or at least that's what Miyamoto says. I like it. And, well, that's pretty much it story-wise. I mean, come on, it's 1986. Now, what you do in the game is travel all around Hyrule collecting different gear and money, or rupees in Zelda's case, finding all 8 dungeons, defeat the bosses at the end of said dungeon, and get the piece of the Triforce. In the very first screen of the game, there's a cave where you can enter on the top left screen, and when you enter it, you get an old man that gives you a sword and says a pretty good meme. The sword is used with the A button, and almost everything else in the game is used with the B button. That could be bombs, a candle, a bow and arrow, a boomerang, a magic wand, a piece of meat that's only used in the game when a monster in Dungeon 7 says grumble grumble. Yeah, that made no sense to me. A flute that's used either to define Dungeon 6 or to defeat one of the dungeon's bosses, and a health potion that's very useful, but you hear this. You can also get things like a raft, a larger shield, a blue or red ring that will not only change your tunic color, but will also change your health, in a sense. You take about half the amount of damage when you have the white tunic and a quarter of the amount of damage you have with the red tunic. You gain all of these and more in either dungeons or stores throughout Hyrule. Since the game is in an overhead perspective, Link can only attack in 4 directions: up, down, left, and right. Which kinda sucks that he can't attack in all 8 directions, which I know is addressed in later installments, like A Link to the Past for example. But at the same time, it can be difficult to hit some enemies, like these knights in many of the dungeons for example, who can only get hit on the side or in the back, not when they're right in front of you, which is rather difficult when they're right in front of you. Also, Link has to stop in his tracks to hit something, so it's rather difficult to hurt some enemies like the knights, like I mentioned, or these wizards that teleport everywhere and fire some magic at you. I should also mention that Link can fire his sword for a long-range attack when his health is full, which is very useful and sucks when he loses it. Your life bar is on the top right if you haven't noticed, and it can be expanded by not only completing dungeons, but finding secret caves throughout Hyrule. The old man comes once again and asks you to take something. Considering that you can get a health potion in many other parts of the game, stay away from it. You can also see the old man in 2 other areas of Hyrule giving you a sword by saying you need to master it before you can have it. That doesn't make any sense, but what he really means is you need to have enough help to get it. Speaking of secrets, yeah, that's pretty much the name of the game here. Located all throughout Hyrule, there are caves that can be found by blowing up walls with bombs, or rooms that can be found by burning down certain bushes with a candle. This is pretty cool for the time by bringing a sense of mystery to the world, with the player going out of their way to blow up almost every wall or burn every bush to find something. You're rewarded with rupees if you burn or blow up the right place, and since rupees are kinda hard to come by in large quantities, this is great. If you burn down the wrong bush though, then you gotta pay the price. Assholes. It's great to have a way to get a lot of rupees, but there's other ways, like the money-making game for example, which I'm sure no one has ever cheated and created a save state before going into the place so you can get a lot of money. The problem with this is, well, you can't really tell what you can or can't destroy, making the game a little more grieving, if anything. Yes, you could buy hints from the old ladies throughout the world, or find the old man in certain caves and read his very vague and poorly translated hints.
But there's a wonderful thing called the internet. Now, many people consider the first Legend of Zelda to be a guide game, a game where you can get most of your enjoyment out of by looking at a guide to know where all the secrets are at. And considering the game's map looks like this, I completely understand why people would use a guide, considering that the game doesn't tell you what bushes to burn or what walls to bomb. Or I'm just using this to cover my ass, you be the judge.
The game even tells you to look at the manual, which, when the game originally came out, it came with a rather large manual for the time, and gave you some hints on where to go next. Hell, kids back in the 80s even had guides like Nintendo Power or other gaming magazines that gave you a map. Now, I know the main gimmick of the game is to discover the world of Hyrule, but thanks to the guide I used to record this gameplay, I had a blast, and found out things I didn't even know about the game. Like, I didn't even know there were parts of the game where you can warp to. Yes, you need to have a certain item to do this, and it can only be done in a few areas, but hey, I'll take it. I should get into one of the draws of Zelda, the dungeons. I find these to be a little more enjoyable than the overworld, where you actually have a map, assuming you can find it in the first place, and there's some obvious rules that you need to know to get past them, like having a candle to light up certain rooms, having a raft to go over water pits, and having bombs to blow up walls once again. The game sometimes gives you bombs, making it a little bit more obvious to say, hey, blow this wall up. Although if you waste all 8 of your bombs, and say you're in one of the last few dungeons, then well, you gotta leave. Luckily, all the progress you made in a dungeon saves, even if you leave it, or when you eventually die. yeah, this game can be difficult, especially in the later dungeons and Death Mountain. Yeah, you have a health potion, but that only really gets you so far. With Dungeon 7's case, where you bomb some walls to progress, and the game doesn't even tell you, and in Death Mountain's case, where you have a bunch of dead ends full of rooms where you have to kill enemies to go through, and rooms where you can't leave. The fuck? Use a guide for this part, folks. You'll need it. Speaking of Death Mountain, this is where you'll fight the final boss, Ganon. Now, throughout the game, you can beat the bosses with most of your gear and your sword, but with Ganon, you have to have the Silver Arrow, which can only be found in Death Mountain. To do the final blow, you need to use the Silver Arrow, or else you're fucked. So after you beat Ganon, you grab his Triforce and save the princess. Holding both of the game's Triforces, the game rolls credits and asks you to play the second quest, which I don't really have any desire to do so. Now, the original Legend of Zelda was definitely groundbreaking for its time, but people picking it up nowadays without a guide or the game's manual, well, you're gonna have a bad time. Like I said before, the game is pretty much a guide game, and unless you know where you're going to be stuck. Now, I know Zelda is not the only game that does this. There are countless other games that can be defined as guide games, like Simon's Quest, or even the original Final Fantasy to a sense. Now, if you have a guide, the game itself is okay in my opinion. I certainly had an alright time playing the game, even with the later dungeons. It's definitely not the hardest game in the NES library, but with Link's hit detection and the game's overall cryptic way of progression, with not clear ways of telling you which walls or which bushes to burn, I can see how the game can turn off gamers today. Graphically, the game looks alright for the NES. I mean, it's a very early game for the system, and the music, even though there are only a few tracks, I enjoy them, and I can see why they're extremely iconic to this day.
Well, I hope I didn't piss off anyone by saying you need a guide for this game, but, well, it's the internet, so... Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and hopefully I'll be back soon. Sooner rather than later. Anyways, stay beautiful, guys.